got our little message there from our
Okay.
our friend telling us it's being recorded.
All right. Well, since we're being recorded, I guess we'll get started. Um, we're going to have a very interesting topic that I hope everybody who's on the call will have something to contribute today, because it's one of those kind of topics where I'm going to guess everybody has something to contribute. Uh, we're going to be talking about the turning points of books, or turning point books, books that help you to change or to do something different in your life, books that have affected you in some kind of way that impacts you and somehow made you a different person. If I were to bring a book myself to the top of that list, it would be Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And whenever I meet people who are going through changes with loved ones, co-workers, just having a hard time with interpersonal relationships, the first thing I say is, go get this book, read it, and then come back and talk to me. You don't have to understand it all, get it all together, but just read it so we have like a basis of conversation. And then after we have a conversation, implore them to put it into practice, because a lot of times, you can read a very influential and powerful book and it can make you feel some kind of way, it feel different and maybe inspire you. But then if you don't change, or you don't act on the things that you're feeling, then it could be questionable how much that book actually change, did anything for you, and what was the point of it. When people write books, whether they're fiction or nonfiction or self-help or whatever, if they write a book with the intent of having an impact on the reader, if you just change a kind of temporary emotional state, it's difficult for me to see that you have extracted the value of that book, uh, if you're not going to do anything after you have read it. Um, that's where the action happens. When you take the thing that you learned and you put it into practice. Uh, uh, yeah, you can think about a thing a long time, but if you don't do anything, it's kind of like the frog on the log. You know, it sits there until the fly comes. But when the fly comes, it's got to be ready to take advantage of it. If it just keeps sitting there on the log, that's going to be a starving frog, very skinny one. So, with that in mind, I want to turn to my co-conspirator Ryan and and talk about maybe some books that he's read, and see if we can kind of get the conversation started with the idea now. And I hope that the rest of you will be thinking, as Ryan and I are having this preliminary discussion. I hope you'll be thinking about books that you've read that's impacted you. And maybe as you think about it, you can maybe jot down a the name of a book, and be thinking also about, how did that book affect me, um, and what lessons that I learned from that book that I have now incorporated into my modus operandi. The way that you act, your default character, the way that you handle things. How has something you learned in a book affected you in some kind of way? So with that, Ryan, what kind of books have you read that have impacted you in some powerful way?
Well, there's a couple that I was going to talk about, and these are are books that sort of, to me, there is an underlying message that I received from reading them. Um, and I have to stress that, like, people interpret books different ways, and not everybody who read these books will think of them the same way. But these were just a couple things that, or a couple books that stuck with me as far as their message. One of them is The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. That was his first book. Um, I sent out a blog post about that I wrote last year. Um, and if any of you saw that, that might give a little more context. But when I read this book, I read there's a Bible verse at the beginning that says, part of it says, "One generation passeth away, another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. The sun also riseth, and the sun goeth down, and hasteth to the place where he arose." Sorry, I'm not very good at those
Yes.
that I'm not used to.
Yeah.
So then I saw that and I kind of forgot about it, and I read through the book, and the book kind of ends abruptly, and there's a lot of action and a lot of things happening, but there's not, that main plot point at the beginning, like, um, some kind of incident or something that somebody's got to solve. It's just these people that are hanging out and drinking in Paris, and the Lost Generation, as they're called sometimes. Ernest Hemingway and a bunch of other people, his friends. And I finished the book. I was like, okay, what was the point of that book? Like, I don't get it. And then I started thinking about the beginning and about the sun rises and it sets, and people live and they die. And I guess kind of what I took out of it, it was like sort of a little bit of nihilism, like nothing you do matters. You could take it that way, but to me, it was like to not worry about little, like the sun's going to rise again tomorrow. Um, what you're doing is important, but like that the cycle just is always continuing. Um, you do what you do in life, and then it kind of just ends, kind of like the book did.
Mm.
So that's really stuck with me, just because it, to me, it sort of helps you put things into context and say, well, that may have happened, but the sun rises again tomorrow. And I
Mm.
think another lesson is to enjoy your life and have fun, and not, try to be as happy as you can.
Yeah, and another thing that comes to mind when you say that is if the sun doesn't rise, then it's all irrelevant, isn't
Right.
it?
Exactly.
It's not, it's like not really a thing anymore, whatever you were thinking about.
Yeah.
uh Interesting. Any other book?
There's one more I was going to talk about, and it's Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison,
Mm.
which is an all-time classic also. Um, there's a lot of racial elements in this. It's written by an unnamed, or it's first person narrative, an unnamed character, a black man in the South. And there's a lot of racial themes and elements, but I think thematically, part of what I learned can be applied more broadly as well. It's about this guy. He goes to college, and I don't want to give the whole thing away in case some of you haven't read it. He goes to college, and he's trying to impress his professor and doing all these things that his professor wants. And then he ends up in New York, kind of, stepping out of his shell a little bit and doing more things just sort of on his own. And, without giving away the ending or anything, I guess what I learned from this book was that people, if you try to please people the whole time, like, a lot of those people you're trying to please, they don't really see you. They just see what they want out of you and what they want you to do. And so I think a lot of what he was saying is that, um, if you really want to be seen, kind of the best way to do that is to live on your own terms. And, whether somebody sees you or not, that's kind of their problem. And, he feels like he's invisible because, no matter what he does, he has so much trouble pleasing all these people that want all these things for him. And of course he starts to realize, well, I'm just invisible to these people, and I'm a tool for what they want, but they don't really see me as a person. And there's a lot of other thematic stuff related to like the invisibility part and stuff like that. And um, it's based on a lot of racial discrimination and other things, but that's just kind of like a life lesson, I think. And
Yeah,
it's a beautifully written book. I just loved it.
yeah,
So
yeah. Those kind of books also, they can have, let's say, unintended messages.
yeah,
For example, like in one case, being invisible is seen as something undesirable, you know, a weight to carry. But in other ways, invisibility is seen as a superpower, you know. So depending on how comfortable you are with yourself and how defined your goals are, it could be that the thing that you're trying to get is the thing that you need least, you know.
right.
It's like a lot of people don't realize how much you can get done because nobody knew that you were doing it,
Exactly.
all that behind the scenes work, and I remember this one passage in the Bible, actually in Matthew, that talks about um, donating, giving money in secret, you know, and even praying in secret. Do everything, you know, all the good stuff that you're doing. Don't do it so that everybody is seeing you, or that they notice. And it has more power when you do it and nobody notices. But of course, if you're insecure, you have this sense that you don't exist because nobody notices you. You need other people to reflect and tell you who you are. If you need other people to tell you who you are, then invisibility is not a good thing. But if you know who you are, or you know who you want to be and what your plans are, in invisibility, that's just like having one of those superpower cloaks. You can walk around and you can get all kinds of stuff done and influence things in a way that people who are seen cannot. I notice sometimes people say, well, why don't you run for politics? No, 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 no. I have enough trouble already. I'm causing enough problems. But but the things you can do, because you don't have that visibility and you don't have the weight of people expecting that they should be able to tell you what to think and how you are. You can just completely ignore them if you don't want to. I mean, if you want to,
Right.
that's a superpower. It's like, just go, okay, I know what I want to do. I don't need you to tell me that I'm a good person or not. I'm working on being a good person. And how do they say, you're not the judge of me, so so when you know that thing, you can walk through the world, and then people can get off your bus whenever they feel like. It's you just pull the buzzer and I'll let you off.
Right. And I think that's a lot of what Ellison was saying too, is
Yeah,
that, like, if you're worried about being seen, then you're doing things that probably aren't doing you a lot of good if you're just doing things to please other people to be
Yes.
seen.
Yeah.
Um, and kind of like with social, that's kind of how social media can be a little bit, with people just wanting to be seen and noticed and everything, and sometimes it has unintended consequences.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Um, yeah, there's a whole lot to be said about visibility, invisibility, fame versus anonymity, you know, and they all have their pluses and minuses. And depending on what you want, you can get varying degrees of it, and then you can make that work for you or not, you know.
Right.
Yeah, good. Well, there's a lot of things that can be said about books that have created a turning point, and so I want to open it up to our audience and participants. Really, I hope it's not a passive thing for you guys. Um, what kind of books have you guys read? Tell us a little bit about the book, and then let's get into maybe how that has affected you. Anyone?
Todd looks like he wants to say something.
Yeah.
Todd always wants to say something.
Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
Sure. I'm one of those people who I feel like, every fourth or fifth book that I read changes my life in some way. But I'll go back to some of the early things, some of the things that kind of set some courses for me, at least two key books. One was Winesburg, Ohio by Sherwood Anderson. Like I think in the 19 teens. He was kind of a predecessor of Hemingway as well. But one thing, it was funny because the protagonist in this book, which is really just a bunch of short stories, vignettes about people living in a small town. The protagonist kind of was this young newspaper editor, of
Mm,
which I was at one point when I read the book, actually. And it was, and so I automatically identified with it. But um, for its time, it was kind of startling, I guess, because it told the story of a small town, a lot of people in it, which I
mm,
lived in a small town with a lot of strange characters, sort of. And the book kind of, it was like a very internal book about the individual characters. They had this whole mechanism in there about the grotesques and how these people live these tortured lives.
mm,
And, for me, it was interesting because what it did for me, I mean, as far as kind of on the transformation side, and granted, when you read it, I just really liked it. I liked its style. It wasn't spectacularly written, but it was kind of a landmark book, was that people live lives that we know nothing about.
mm,
And, the one of the key things I took away from that is that you just can't take for granted what people, what they think or what they do. You have interactions with them, and to make judgments off of whatever small surface you have on them, even in a small town like that,
mm,
is you're really kind of shortchanging your own experience. And so, that was something I really, really stuck with me for a long time. I mean, as I go back and reread the book, it's never as good as when I first read it. But at the time, it transformed the way I looked because I had identified so closely to it, how I looked at other people and how I interacted with them. And so that was one big book, like maybe in my college years. And a little bit before that, really quickly, one book that I really liked from that from when I was like early in my college years and shortly thereafter was Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach. And it
mm,
had a lot to do with limitations and limitations that other people put upon you that you adopt, and how to, we don't need to live in that realm. That's a real simplistic way to put it, probably. Jonathan Livingston Seagull, for people who haven't heard of it, because it was kind of popular in the New Age era of authors, American literature, was that just it was about a bird, about a seagull who wanted to fly fast. And eventually he flies fast, and he actually gets beyond flying fast, where eventually he's able to almost transport himself because he's able to move past the limitation of thinking of himself as just a seagull and then a bird, and then the idea of flight, moving beyond and going to more of, I guess, somewhat transcendental. I mean, it may get a little spacey, but realistically, it was a great thing for me to kind of think about my own limitations that I put on myself that others had laid upon me. And from that point on, I really worked hard to not do that. And so those two books were really kind of important in they were moving and kind of set forth a couple paths for me that have stuck with me for decades now.
What was the name of that first book again, Todd?
Winesburg, Ohio.
Winesburg.
Right. It's from the 19 teens. It was a book that actually inspired Hemingway. But it was written by an ad copy salesman, and it's a very simple reading book, but it had a lasting impact on me.
Yeah. So what kind of things did that book inspire you to do? Can you give us, for example, some anecdotes about a way you started to think, or the way you started to act that you didn't before, and then what difference did that make in your life?
Exactly. There's one key thing, especially with Winesburg, that I carried forth forever, and I tell people this to this day, is that, and I believe this, and I'll hold to this belief always, is that nobody tries to fail. Everybody tries to do their best, whether they know, whether you see that or not. And that book really showed me, because it showed a lot of different people struggling with whatever they were struggling with, but how they did it. And then it showed how other people saw it and, often misinterpreted that. And for me, I always carry that forward, because I think sometimes it's easy to think, oh, these people are just out there trying to cut me down, or they're just such an impediment, or they're just being against me to be against me. But I really, reading that book, it's kind of that, it's very common adage today that everybody has their own, battles that they're fighting, you don't know it. But I mean, I think in terms of how you react to people, if you start from that thought that nobody is trying to do poorly, nobody's trying to fail necessarily, nobody's trying to do bad, they're just doing the best that they can with what their experience is. And that from that point on, after reading that book, or shortly after reading that book, I suppose it took some rumination, but I really have always stuck by that. And it's a liberating thought for me. So I don't feel like I have to judge what people's intentions are. I go, well, they're trying to do that. They may not be doing that, but I think they're trying to do that. And
second, you said it's a liberating thought for you. What is the it?
That people are not trying to, purposely do badly, or, that they really are trying to do well. It's just, it may not be what fits into my point of view. Or others, or a lot of people's, I should say.
Anybody else? Yeah. Interesting.
Well, I was thinking to follow up on that. I'm not sure that this book changed the way I thought, but it kind of reinforces the idea that you don't know what's going on with that other person, or you don't know what's going on in that culture. And it's good if you take time to stop and think about it. And I'm referring to Barbara Kingsolver's The Poisonwood Bible. And it takes place in Africa. And I have
your phone, your mic went off, Cheryl. Your mic is off.
Sorry, I bumped it. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
So you said it took place in Africa. You say it took place in Africa, and could you pick up there?
Right. And it's been long enough ago that I've read it. even for the second and third time, that I don't remember exactly where. But that the story is about a minister, a preacher, who wants to go to Africa and change people's lives.
Mm,
But he wants to do it his way.
mm,
And he wants to baptize people. Okay, one incident, he wants to baptize people. He wants to baptize them in the river.
mm.
And the people won't do it because there's crocodiles in the river. And so
They're
it's
not trusting Jesus that much. They trust the crocodile, but not.
right. So that even though nobody's trying to fail, like you pointed out, this guy is failing because he's trying not to fail. He's
Mm,
trying to show a whole other culture his way of doing things because this is what he believes.
mm,
And it's very traumatic on his family as well. Um, another incident is where you're supposed to take your malaria pills, and the youngest child doesn't take them. She sticks them on the wall behind her bed.
mm.
And so she gets sick.
Hmm.
She
Oh
almost
yeah, yeah.
died. Yeah. So I think it's just reinforcing to me that when you go to another culture, that you do need to think about that the way you look at things is not always the way they look at things. Also, sometimes there's a comment about a traveler said, well, they should have learned some English for us. Well, well, so one of the things I do try to do is to try to at least learn the numbers before I go somewhere where they don't speak my language. So anyway, that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah,
I'll mute me now.
yeah. That was a very important insight because you could see how not only did you get different ideas, but it was something that you could actually act on and incorporate into just the way you move around in the world. And that really provides some good value from a book. Um, yeah. Anyone else have a book that they can talk about, something that they read and it affected them?
Say a few things. Can you hear me? I'm having some technical problems this morning for whatever reason. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we got you. You sounding good, man.
Yep.
Look good, sound good.
Not the first part. Thank you. Reading Faulkner turned me into an English major. I was an indifferent student in a sophomore required course, and Faulkner just rocked me back and turned me from my plan of being a high school history teacher and football coach, English major, and another path. But easily my most significant turning point book is a book called Housemaid of Dawn by the title writer Ken Scott Momading.
Say that again, Charles.
Housemaid of Dawn.
House Made of Dawn.
Yeah, it's Housemaid of Dawn.
Okay.
I won the Pulitzer Prize in 1969. And it's a narrative about a young Indian guy who returns from war, in his case, World War II, to his native Pueblo and tries to recover, or is trying to recover psychically, emotionally from the experience of war. And he begins in a state of hopelessness. He's dispirited, he's voiceless, he's in a state of paralysis, he's lost connection with his community, with the earth itself. He's in big trouble psychologically. I had recently returned from war when I read that book, and I wasn't where he was, but I also didn't have much sense of possibility, which is characteristic of returning from a traumatic experience, in this case, war. I was in a PhD program. It was a good one. It was intellectually stimulating, but it wasn't touching my heart. I suppose one of the reasons for that is that I was too distracted, but another reason is that most of the classes are pre-academic explorations of the text and not what I needed and what I needed to get back to. But that book took me there. It restored my sense of possibility. And I won't say it saved my life, but it changed my life. It certainly changed the course of my life. As I began to read more text by native authors and then read back into the oral traditions and begin to acquire some understanding of what that was all about. That was really the beginning of the healing process for me, and recovery of myself, restoration of myself, if you will. It restored my soul in certain ways. And it's, he struggles throughout the book to recover his voice, and therefore to restore his being. And he finally begins to do that. And at the end of the book, he's running a long tradition of marathon running in his tribe. And he's running, Mohammed says, on the rise of a song. He's recovering his voice, and he's recovering who he is. That, to me, was tremendously inspirational. It's a beautiful book. I mean, you can read, it's one of those books that you can read and reread. A friend of mine who happened to be Kiowa recommended it to me, told me he'd read it 30 times. Well, it was originally intended as a long poem, and it's such a richly poetic text that in every reading you understand something more, you become something more. At least that's been my experience with it. And I suppose that's another thing that I will say about good books in general, that rereading them is endlessly fruitful, I think, because of course, in subsequent readings, you have had more experiences and you have become different in certain ways. And so your responses to the text become something additional to your total understanding. And so, House Made a Dawn, I recommend it highly enough. And it's not just for recovery of spirit in the aftermath of war. I think it's for everybody who, as we are all, sooner or later traumatized, obviously, and have to find our way back from it and find ways to restore our spirits. That's the book to read and read deeply and think about. I find it to be really so helpful. I've always highly recommended it.
What kind of things do you think you do different now, Charles, that as a result of the book affecting you, as you have pointed out? What kinds of things do you do differently now?
Well, I think the main thing about it is it returned me to what I'd had before the experience of war. A good book is, the mindset about Invisible Man is universal in that sense. So I think I had lost my connections, you know, with things that had been important to me. Experience of war changes your perceptions if you let it permanently. And so you know, it restored my sense of community, or began to restore my sense of community. And of course, tribal philosophy is all about community. But I began to think more deeply again about my relationship with my community and with the earth itself. You know, that's another thing that has consequences, or you have kind of an alienation from the earth itself. In some cases, and but I suppose the main thing it did for me is it dramatically changed my philosophy of language, or restored what had been my attitude toward language when I was young. You know, we were all full of a sense of possibility, words of power, and we become through words and so forth. But over time, you can develop a kind of cynicism about language. When I went to graduate school, the cynicism was great. The deconstruction was very popular, and you know, negative existentialism, and all these texts to, in complicated ways, dramatize how things were meaningless. Life was a game. You know, I'm not saying all of modern literature at the time was like that, but quite a bit of it was. But in contrast to that, in House Made of Dawn, another text by tribal people, there's this deep understanding of the sacred power of the word. In the beginning was the word, you know, and we become through which we are word beings, and so that belief in the efficacy of language, that belief in the power of the word, that yes, there are truths and we can get to them through finding the right words. Life is all about finding the right words, and that's what Abel does in House Made of Dawn. And before that, my attitude toward language was sort of, well, I said cynical. I guess cynicism is I was studying it, I was understanding it, I was going through the motions in my graduate courses, but I didn't have the deep and abiding belief in it that I began to acquire or recover. Because I do think children have that in the process of reading both House Made of Dawn and subsequent books. So you're back to your book, The Power of Positive Thinking, huh? It's something along those lines, isn't it?
Yeah, well, this book is not, it wasn't power of positive thinking. It was how to win friends and influence people.
Right. The foundation of that is language, right? Is understanding that how do I know what I think until I see what I say? Language is discovery. You can't, I used to tell my students, life is all about finding the right words. And the better words you find, the better self-understanding you have, and the better understood you are by others. Foundationally, language.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, that's why that's the kind of like the foundation of books, is organizing it, and words help us to organize our thoughts. It's good to have thoughts before, and then attach words to them, rather than find words and then attach thoughts to them, which is often what we can be led to do. But that's a discussion for another time. Anyone else have, did you have anything else you were going to add, Charles?
No, not at this point.
Okay.
I because I missed part of the earlier commentary, though, I guess I will say about Winesburg, Ohio. Did you talk about the Book of the Grotesque, which is a parable which begins it while I was out of the loop? Can you hear me?
Yes, sorry. I'm just trying to find the mute button. Sorry. Yeah. So the idea of protest, absolutely.
Yeah, that book is. Did you talk about that earlier when I was
just briefly about the mechanism of it, right?
Yeah, that book I think is powerfully influential too, and the Book of the Grotesque, which frames it, is something I talked about in class. That there are these various truths, and the people come along and seize one or just several truths and make that truth or those truths their truth in the process. They become that truth and become grotesque. So it's all about understanding the multiplicity of truths and the importance of acquiring as many as possible rather than clinging to just one or a few. And each of the stories is about that, isn't it? Person who is too committed to his or her truth and turns into a grotesque. Beautiful book. I highly recommend it too.
Absolutely.
Yes. Anyone else have a book that has influenced them, given them a new perspective? Anybody?
I'll go.
I was waiting.
Well, I've been waiting for others to go too, and I don't. I actually have two, but one is, and like Todd said, wow, it's really hard to narrow down, what books have influenced you. It's just incredible. But one of them that has stayed with me a great deal is Joseph Marshall's The Journey of Crazy Horse. And that is one of the most powerful books I've ever read. And if you haven't read it, I know it was the One Book South Dakota in 2011, I believe. And I didn't read it then. I don't know why. I read it a little bit later than that. But again, if you're not familiar with that, it's about the influx of white people and colonization and, the disasters that happened to Native American people. And the reason that book has had so much influence on me is that we can know history. I mean, I'm a native South Dakotan. I know the history. I'm interested in all kinds of history. You can know that, but you don't feel it. You don't get it until you read a book like The Journey of Crazy Horse. And I felt it. And it just resonated so deeply with me. And it's just, I can't say that it changed my behavior, but certainly I look at things, it has altered my perspective. Lawrence, you're kind of asking about perspective. And what's happening now with, the proposed changes in teaching history and so forth, just make me sick because of this very thing. This what we need to understand. And actually last night when I was sitting down to prepare for today, I thought I was picking up The Journey of Crazy Horse, but I was actually picking up Crazy Horse Weeps because the covers are just the same. And so I started rereading just to kind of refamiliarize myself. And I thought, wow, this is so modern. The preface is really different from what I remember. Well, that's why. But the truths that Marshall writes about in the preface deal with that very topic and how, the importance of history. And we all know this, this is not, I'm not telling you anything new. So that's the book that really has impacted me very deeply, or a book that has impacted me deeply.
Mhm. Absolutely. That what I find interesting in uh, everyone's reaction to this question is the issue of context, and how books can create a context through which you can feel something different. Kind of like, I think that's kind of what you're saying, Lynn, is that, okay, yeah, we can have these data points, and that is history. And it can be told in an engaging way, that historical part, the data points can be presented in an impactful way. But it's feeling something. This is where a lot of change happens within us when it's put into context so that you can see, feel, hear, even maybe smell something different. That's when the history comes alive, and put it in context. And one of the interesting things about context is there is no single context. There are many contexts. And that's where I find discussing books becomes very valuable, because each person that reads a book experiences it in a different way, and therefore has a different context in which to put the book, especially when we elevate that book to our own experiences and try to feel something. If the book makes us feel something, because the feeling isn't just about the book, the feeling is an interaction between you and the book, therefore the author, right? So each person brings a different thing. It's like a recipe, and one person's flour is a different than another flour, and depending on that flour, you'll get a different biscuit. you know uh, you can put let's say 2% or full whole milk or cream in, and it's all milk, but you'll get a different result. So each person that brings a context, or even just baking the same recipe in a different oven, sometimes it's theoretically the same temperature, and you can get a different product. So all of those contextual things in our own lives will make a difference in how we experience a book. So that really speaks to um, sharing a book with others.
Right. And especially, I think the fact that in this book, Crazy Horse came to life. And, the idea that he's in some ways an enigma. There are no photographs of him, so the monument is, just all conjecture how he looks. But, the image of him weeping at his dead daughter's scaffold, losing his daughter and spending several days weeping at the scaffold, and just his love life and the battles, and just all, it was just so completely humanized. And that's where that's where that feeling really comes from, I think. And that's it, it's a masterpiece. It's an absolute masterpiece, I think, in that regard.
Mhm. Mhm. Lynn, what kind of things, as a result of feeling something different about this book, or as a result of reading the book, can you point to any things that you have done different, any activities that you have engaged in or been encouraged or inspired to engage in, any different things in your life in a practical sense that's made some difference like that? Could you find any of those?
I can't really point to any particular incident, but I think that anybody who knows me knows that I'm quite outspoken. And You're laughing, Ryan.
I can't help it. Sorry. I never noticed. What are you talking about?
Got kind of a big mouth. People know what I think. Um, but it has, if it's possible, made me speak out a little bit more, I think, about, what is important to, this, like I was saying before, with what's happening with the history curriculum and so forth. I'm quite outspoken against that. And I just, I really try hard to, I don't want to be unpleasant about it, but I do try to let people know, this I think is important. This is, we're really all pretty much the same. The human condition is pretty much the same for all of us. And we're on the same planet. We need to try to do what's best for all of us, I think. And so that's one way of trying to accomplish that, is simply by talking to people.
Yes. Well, I'm glad but would you say that the book helped you in some way, or pointed you in that experience with the book? Would you say that enhanced your I don't know, confidence doesn't seem to be quite the
Yeah,
right.
I would say that. I think it's just a level of understanding that, that changed. When I started talking about this book, yes, we can know what happened. We know, and we can understand it, I think, and we know the horrors, and we know the tragedies, and so forth, and can comment on those things. But a real true understanding, I think, of the human element was opened up to me because of this book. And maybe, I shouldn't even admit that at my age, to say that it took me this long to really feel the effects, and understand what, the marginalization of so many people, and the pain and suffering is. I just feel it differently.
I would like to add a comment to what Lynn is talking about. I too am concerned about the recent discussion of curriculum, which for me is all about finding ways to maintain what might be called the master narrative.
Yeah.
We don't want to change, we being some elements of our country, at least, we don't want to change what we think the main story is. And so the main story is not about people like Crazy Horse. All he was in the master narrative was an adversary, and not a very worthy one. We don't know the man until somebody like Joseph Marshall comes along and writes what he writes. And that's what good books do, don't they? They challenge the master narrative and add stories so that we have a different understanding of the whole. South Dakotans typically don't know anything about American Indian history and culture. I mean, we're making some progress in that regard, but it's slow. And we've made some progress with curriculum reform, but there's a long way to go. So, you can get somebody like Lynn, who is bright and highly educated and a teacher, and only belatedly comes to an understanding of who Crazy Horse was, who was by any measurable criteria one of the greatest persons in American history. Ought to be talked of alongside of those that we've glorified and glamorized in the master narrative forever. But we don't have those people in mind. We don't think of them other than as the other. And until we have more challenges to the master narrative, that's going to be ongoing. And I think that's what this curriculum thing is all about these days. We don't want to hear the rest of it. We want to stick to the same old story that we've all But come to believe we're all indoctrinated by don't add anything to the mix, you know. Let's not do that. We're fine the way we are. Today is the rest of the day, the first day of the rest of our lives kind of thing. We don't have to revisit what's been. We don't have to learn anything about anything additional. We know what we know. And so it's very encouraging for me to hear Lynn say what she says about what she now understands about crazy horse, which everybody ought to understand. You know, there's no threat in that. He was a great man. Like all great men, he should be learned from rather than ignored as he has been all these years.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what books can do for us. That's what books do to us, is bring all of that kind of context, anecdotes, ways for us to see things, to experience life through some other people's eyes. And often the author will bring different people other than the author, you know, even though that author is filtering it through their experience. They bring other perspectives, especially when you have a number of characters interacting. They can give you an exercise in looking through different peepholes at the same problem or the same issue, same experience, and allow you to experience the same thing in a different way, almost as a different person. So I would encourage people, as you are reading books and as you're discovering books, to keep that value in mind, you know, that it's a precious and special thing because, or when, you know, because all books aren't written equal, you know, when they can bring to you a perspective that you would otherwise be bereft of or not have, you know, you would just not have that that perspective. But again, I will underscore that discussing that book or sharing that book with someone else, and if not the book, the experiences or the things you learned in that book with others, will amplify what you get out of the book. But finally, it's what you do with it, you know. Many times people will read very powerful books and books that bring very powerful experiences that's outside of whatever bubble we each live in, some kind of bubble, but there are these other bubbles that we could go visit. You know, you ever watch the soap bubbles, how they, you know, they move around and then they join and they kind of like stick next to each other, but then sometimes they go boom and then they become one bubble, you know. So sometimes, you know, books and experiences with other people can give us something of that soap bubble effect, bring our bubble next to somebody else's bubble. But finally, we need to do something with that. You know, if all of the new things that we learn just become kind of intellectual cocktail talk, you know, maybe it has some meaning to somebody, but for me, it just seems like a lost opportunity. Seems like something's missing, you know. If you read a book about Native Americans, make some effort to go and meet someone, become involved in that community in some kind of way, you know, and not necessarily as a community, but as a person, you know, just experience people as people. But, you know, it's like you read a travel book about an interesting place, and then that's it. Well, if you can't visit, oh, at least you got that. But if you can't visit, the book starts to make sense when you're in that place, you know. if you read a book, especially if it's current and the place is still kind of the same, you have some new opportunities. And so I would encourage you not to waste those opportunities. We unfortunately have come to the end of our session today. I hope those of you who were observers, or sometimes we refer to you as lurkers, but not derogatorily, but those of you who are observers, I hope you got something out of it. But again, I will encourage you without, I don't want to wring your neck or anything, but just want to make you feel welcome that your contributions are also welcomed in this conversation, because that's how we all become enriched. So until next time, next week, same time, same station, thank you and goodbye.